the question that I want to pose to you, and we can discuss this a little bit, it was wonderful. My friend came up to me here a moment ago and asked this, he posed the question very similar, is what happened in the church? How kind of did we get here so that where relationship is not a significant part of the fabric of disciple making? Right? So my question to you is, what do you think happened? Was that taken out or removed from the process of disciple making? Okay, what are your thoughts on that? I'd love to hear from you.
I think it's become let my will be done in the conversation more than let thy will be done.
Okay.
And it's become I think it's become subconscious now. So you don't really understand if you're actually speaking to the person or to the problem.
Okay.
So it's like you're giving a solution to the problem, but actually missing out on the person having the problem.
Okay. Yeah. That's great. I think a part of that, of what you're saying as well, is I think we're going to talk a lot about how intentional Jesus was in his disciple making, and we sometimes make assumptions, and we think that it's happening. We make assumptions that, well, disciple making is going to happen, and we kind of assume that it gets passed on. That disciple making is something that everybody knows or learns. And I like what you said, that my will. So we kind of start to drift and we think, well, whatever kind of method that I have that I can put in, that's going to work. That I can kind of outsmart God a little bit. I don't think we intentionally think that. But a key component of that, though, is when we change what I call the bullseye. When we shift what the target is. And when the target moved from a strong disciple of Jesus Christ to whether we, I think, would admit it or not, our target shifted to maybe just attendance or just salvation. That we count it as a win that we've had salvations and that we celebrate, and that we should celebrate when someone comes to Christ. But we adopted this mentality a little bit in the church, and this goes to your point about kind of my will, is when we look at it and go, well, once a person accepts Christ, then great, we won, game's over, that was the big victory. Jesus never called you to just go make converts. Nowhere does he say that, to go make converts. And we kind of assumed that the discipling would happen. I compare it to this, is if someone has a child, in fact, one of our close friends, they just had a baby today, I think. Yeah, today. Okay. Now, when that child was born, okay, I know this family very well. When they get home tomorrow, they're not going to set the baby on the couch and say, okay, there's the fridge, right? There's the stove. There's where all the food is. Good luck. We'll see you later. What's going to happen to that infant? They'll die, won't they? Would they die? What would we call that if you as a parent did that to a child? That would be called what? Abuse. I mean, most countries you'd go to jail for that. But we do it all the time in the church. To spiritual infants. All the time. Oh, they accepted Christ. Good. We check mark. Now let's move on to the next. And the person goes, wait a minute. How do I eat? What do I do? Oh, I'll sing some songs. What do I do? But they accepted Christ. That's good. Now what? Right? Great point back there. Somebody else.
Hi, Pastor Brandon. Thank you very much for reminding us again about disciple making as a core mission that we have lost. Just a quick question, and if you can elaborate for us, how we can right the tension or reconcile the fact that for some churches particularly, they believe they have a very specific call from God and a certain gifting, be it to serve the poor, be it to move in the supernatural, healing, or a very clear, specific niche they believe, and how do we reconcile that and right the tension towards disciple making as the core mission?
Okay. So how I heard your question is, how do we reconcile when a church feels a specific calling to do a specific, say, serve the poor, or kind of fill in the blank? I think any of those things are part of what we are called to do. I'm a Bible guy. And so when I look at it and I ask the question, well, what did Jesus call me to do? He called me to go make disciples. He called his church to go make disciples. I would wrestle with the fact of limiting it just to serving people. I think we should serve people. I think that's part of it. I think that's a way to reach people that do not know Jesus. And we should fulfill that. Our church back in Houston has a very specific part of our call is going to be to minister to veterans of war, because we're right next door to a clinic that serves military veterans. Well, we're gonna serve them. Now, a church 10 miles away may not, because they're not positioned next door to the military hospital. But serving those folks doesn't mean I can't go still fulfill Matthew 28:19. I think we kind of get too narrow-minded and lose the bigger picture of what Jesus has called us to do. Whether we go heal, look at, why did Jesus heal? Why did he serve the poor? It was all at the end of the day to teach his disciples to be fishers of men, isn't it? It is the Great Commission. And as I said, I don't think, and I'd argue this and die on this hill, that we have the right to substitute in any calling that we think we want and disregard the Great Commission. I think we can accomplish both things based on the needs that Jesus puts in front of each of our individual churches. Yeah, that's great. So I want to make sure we stick back to this original question I asked about relationship. How do you think that was removed from the fabric as a whole to disciple making?
My name is Jun Kiat from Evangel Baptist. I would like to ask about the structural issue. In the past, the church is a home church. No problem with a relationship. They know everyone so well. Mm-hmm. They know their needs and they meet their needs. But when the church become an institutional church, examples for the present times is a mega church. They don't know one another. Mm-hmm. It's very, very common. And people become more impersonal with one another. So my question is this relationship problem is structural problem or is a personal problem?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I'll even turn your question into a comment. I think the comment is as a potential answer to my question is, how did this happen, is that the church became too institutional, or it became a personal value. Do we really value relationship? Okay? And as I said earlier, if you do a lot of the studies of what's going on, not even just with the church, but culturally, worldwide, globalization, social media, all of the things that we're faced today, and this is true, again, that I ran across, whether you're in Uganda, Mexico, or probably even Singapore, is it's a global issue of where we're at relationally, kind of globally, of what we believe, the sense of community, a sense of being in relationship. And the church has kind of lagged behind, chasing kind of where the world is going, rather than trying to be different. And instead of the church going, you know what, no, we're not going to abandon what we believe about relationship, regardless of where the world is going to go, we have to be who Jesus calls us to be. And so then hence the church kind of can tend to, institutionalize some things. Well, we have to programatize everything so that people can be a part of anything. And we can get busy chasing programs, and we even at times, I think, build buildings, put our focus on structures and buildings and stuff that isn't necessarily bad, but at the expense of sometimes relationship. And the church can suffer for it. But it'll always come back to, again, no matter what culture we're in, is do I believe that I am personally called to make a disciple of Jesus Christ that can make a disciple? And if that's my fundamental stance, then I can build the church from there. I can look at the church from that perspective versus trying to just chase programmatic thinking. So I think it's both and what you're saying. I think the church has become so busy with its programs and institutionalized things that it's had to forfeit some relationship because it doesn't have time for it. I don't have the time for disciple making. I'm too busy doing church. Right? And then fundamentally with our own lives is, do we make it a priority? Is it a priority that we spend time with each other? For me, I have to make a decision. I live in Houston, Texas. It's the 4th largest city in the United States. It is busy. People are going to... Christopher asked me a question yesterday. He says, we're kind of in the hustle and bustle of people. He said, do the people of Singapore walk faster, or do the people in Texas walk faster? We move? It's craziness wherever you go. We're humans, right? And I look at it and I go, I have 4 kids. Some of you know this. My family just went through a horrible tragedy. And life is nuts and crazy and busy. But I have to ask a question. Where do my priorities go? What do I do with my time? And I know I have to stand before the Lord and answer that question. And so I'm telling you, you will not get a ton of empathy from me about, well, I'm too busy. No, you're not. You just have your time and priorities screwed up. It's painful to maybe hear or face, but I don't do anything else. I disciple my kids. I disciple the handful of guys that God's put in my life. I try to get my sermon prepared. I spend time with some of my team. That's what I do. It's not exciting. But discipleship is, you'll hear me say this a bunch, making disciples. Think of this for Jesus. Think of the work he had to put in with those guys. Day in and day out. We saw his frustration come out, didn't he? How many times Jesus said, oh, you guys, you of little faith. Oh my goodness, really? I mean, he dealt with those things with them. I can't tell you how many times the guys in my small group right now, I want to just slap them. Wake up, right? They keep making the same dumb mistake over and over. Discipleship is a grind. It's not flashy. It's not exciting. It's hard work. It's difficult. It requires a lot of prayer. It requires a lot of preparation. And it requires us to get our priorities in order and to make time for it. Because disciples are not made outside of the context of relationship. I cannot make a disciple by texting them. I can't make a disciple through Facebook. It doesn't work that way. So I think it's both. We've structured some things that really hurt us in the church. We've institutionalized some things that make us really busy, but don't really translate to great things at the end of the day. And relationally, making time for it and prioritizing it. It's great. Maybe one more. Yes, sir. There's one in the back there.
In your experience, we have a lot of different activities among different churches. Which are the activities do you think they are specifically for disciple-making activities? Sunday school, fellowship, cell group, and so on and so forth. So maybe you want to share about your church. How do you, organize in such a way that those activities are very focused in such a way that the main theme is to do disciple making.
Yeah.
So what are things?
Great question. So the question, how I understood it, is when you look at the church and the the activities that you do, how do you decide which ones help making disciples and which ones do not? Did I capture your question correct? Okay. So, and I resist a little bit answering that because we're going to get into a lot of that later. And as I said at the beginning, I really want to challenge you guys right now to not get into that organizational thinking yet. So let me kind of, I guess, break my own rule a little bit and answer that. But I want to say this. If it starts with me, and this is the next section that I'm going to get into a lot. If it starts with me personally, and I can answer the question, yes, in my life there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, whatever people that I am personally discipling. Okay, and I can look at that and I can see the fruit of that, and they are learning to turn and disciple someone else. And that fruit is present. Once I can say, yes, that's happening, now I can examine and look at the church. Because now I have a frame of reference and an experience, and I have the right lenses on to look at the church at all. Okay? So I don't think I can adequately answer your question without the step 1 happening first. Okay? Is that fair to say? Okay. So, yes, we'll say that is happening now when we look at the church. I look at it from the perspective of kind of measuring or asking the question, at the end of the day, does this lead and help somebody become a disciple of Jesus Christ? Okay, so like the tool, how many of you are aware, familiar, or have seen the discipleship wheel in the workbooks? How many of you guys have seen that? Some of you, we're going to make those resources available for you. But that tool, the reason that we use that is for us to be able to look at and identify and ask the question, is that helping people move through the discipleship process? Okay, so if we do an activity and we spend money on it and we're doing it, and at the end of the day, we did not help anyone move from being, let's say, a spiritual infant and growing in their faith at all. They didn't learn how to make a disciple. They didn't learn how to be closer to Jesus. It didn't translate into discipling, then we quit doing it. Even some of the most favored, wonderful programs at one time in the church, if they do not equal disciple making or help us make disciples, at the end of the day, it's got to go. Now, we may have to change that program or tweak it or modify it to help, or we may need to cut it. But that backs all the way up to us to say, again, at the end of the day, we have to make disciples. And if we're not, we got to quit doing it. And even though people may say, well, that's my favorite thing, and you better not quit doing that, I don't answer to you. Now, that may seem harsh, and I need to do it in a loving, kind way, but at the end of the day, we got to be disciple makers. That's what's going to change the world, Jesus' methodology. And so we put it into a filter, and some of there's a bunch of resources we have that help with that, but that's kind of what we would do. Yes, sir.
We think about it in terms of legal status and in religious terminology, so in, out, box ticked, box not ticked, heaven, hell, that sort of thing. So the way we're even communicating to people who don't know Jesus, they think, okay, I crossed the line, job done.
Yes.
I don't need relationship.
Yes.
That's one side. I think another side is connected to that, we tend to extract individuals. So people who respond to the gospel, we extract them from their community context, their relational context, and we plonk them in a new community where they don't know anybody.
Yes.
And there's reasons we do that, but it divorces them from their community, stops the gospel moving through that, and we've completely disrupted all their relationships often.
Yes.
So just two thoughts.
Outstanding. That's fantastic. You're spot on. I love that we have a tendency in the church to, when somebody accepts the gospel, to kind of pluck them out of their community and now expect them to kind of participate in this new this new community that's separated from them. And also, we tend to teach the gospel as kind of just a crossing the line once you've checked the box. And the whole presentation of the gospel, that's not really the presentation of the gospel that we see in Scripture. The presentation of the gospel is much more relational. It's much more of a process. And I'd even, kind of to tag onto what you're saying, is propose this thought to you. At what point, biblically, does a person begin the disciple process? When do they begin it? I would argue you begin before you're ever saved. Scripture says the Holy Spirit is doing what? Drawing. So is God at work in your neighbor's life that does not know Jesus? Absolutely. Was God at work in the lives of the 12 before Jesus ever came to them? Absolutely he was. See, we need to understand that placing faith in Jesus is part of the process, a critical, a vital part. But the process has been going on before and it'll continue to go on after. And if we communicate kind of a start and end, we're miscommunicating the gospel. I love what, now I just forgot his name, one of my favorite authors, slipped out of my mind. He said, we have to preach the gospel to ourselves every day. Bridges, very good, thank you. We preach it every day. Isn't that true? That the gospel is it's who we are. It's part of living out, I'm saved by grace through faith. Discipleship is us. We can tend to get into this mindset, and we even teach it that, I'm far from God, or I'm close to God, or no, right? Once we accept Jesus Christ, we're as close to Jesus as we're going to be until we're in heaven. Discipleship is about understanding that relationship with Him and the relationship with His church. Either, right? Do we believe Scripture? I never leave you. He's always there. Now, we may be struggling or having issues, but that's not God's problem, right? Discipleship is about understanding that relationship. So there is no finish line until we're with the Lord, right? And that's even a funny term to use. Excellent. Okay, maybe one more. We got time for it. Yes.
Life. We are very happy to be working Monday to Friday, and we are very good Christians on Sundays. And so that's how we take the relationship out, because on Mondays to Friday, we're too busy to be meeting. I was talking to someone over the weekend, and we say that the families used to hang out during the week, and that's how the children became close to each other in the church. But now the families don't hang about together as much during the week. And so the children only see each other on Sundays. And so that's why the children in Sunday school, they don't know each other very well.
That's great. Exactly. I mean, it's just along the same lines that we're talking about, is when the church has institutionalized and it becomes in people's mind, church is something I go to. Right? I go to a building and that is church. That's not Jesus' definition. Right? In fact, we know, studying in Scripture, that the word church is actually an adjective. It's not a noun. It's a word that describes a group of people. The called out ones is what it means. Right? The ecclesia, it is the called out ones, those that have been called out. Well, called out to do what? Right? If we get into the mindset that we're supposed to go to church instead of remembering that we are the church. It never was about a building. And we have to look at that and go, that mindset, even within the people of our church, is we can kind of, just like we do with the gospel, we somewhat miscommunicate it a little bit. I don't think intentionally. Nobody's hearts are to do anything wrong or bad. I hope so. That's not what it is. It's no, we've been handed some boxes that maybe we need to kind of look at and go, that's not working real well. That's why we're all here. and going, you know what, when we communicate that church is about something that I go to versus something that I am, that changes fundamentally my approach to disciple making. So Monday through Friday, I would never think about making a disciple. Well, discipleship is what I do at the church when I go to the church. It's what I had you write down on a piece of paper. Discipleship is not what you do. It's who you are. So if I'm having coffee with a friend, yesterday when we were laughing and talking life over lunch with Christopher, and we were talking about the church and different things, that's a form of discipling. Maybe not as intentional, but we were doing life together. And think about Jesus' methodology when he walked along the road. He would look out in a field and say, oh, the kingdom of heaven is like. And he would teach and he would model and he would live and he would do life. Because disciples are made in the context of relationship. And if we extract that, it's taking the very fiber out, the very skeleton out of the body and expecting it to stand and walk. It just isn't going to work. I want to add this piece on before we go to break here. I want you to hear me very clearly, because a lot of you that are educators or that teach Sunday school classes, I want you to hear me on this. I absolutely believe in teaching and education, and that classrooms are a good thing, that we should teach. I just don't agree with teaching in classroom only. Jesus had times where he sat everybody down and taught them, didn't he? That's part of what he did. But we've expected that to do it all. And then we run into these problems where people don't know, how does that work? How do I do that? I'll close with this story. I was leading a small group, and I was discipling this group of men. If some of you read some of the materials, you'll be familiar with this story. There's this guy that I had been discipling. His name was Tim. Tim had not been a Christian for very long. And Tim was sitting in service on a Sunday, and our senior pastor, Jim Putman, was preaching on being a godly husband and godly father. And he was teaching this message, a great message, and we went into small group. I had small group two nights later, and I'm sitting in group. Now remember, Tim is a new believer at the time, and he's sitting in there, and I look, and now Tim was normally a pretty talkative guy. He's pretty vibrant, participated, and we sit down in group, and the whole time Tim's got his arms folded, and he's got this look. I was like, whoa, what's the matter? Something's wrong with Tim. And everybody in the room could kind of feel it. And we're going about the lesson and kind of in group's done. He never says a word. And I come over to him and I said, Tim, what's the matter? What's wrong? It's exactly what he said to me. Oh, this Christianity thing is garbage. He goes, I don't want anything to do with it. Whoa. What do you mean? He goes, I can't do any of this stuff. He goes, I don't know how to do any of it. He goes, I just don't want to feel like a failure all the time, so this is not for me. I'm out. I said, hold on. Let's go talk. So we got up and we went into the dining area and sat around the dining room table. And I grabbed the other guys from group. I said, come in here, guys, sit down with me. And they all sat around the table. And I asked him, I said, what's happened? What's the matter? Come on, tell us. He said, well, Sunday, Pastor Jim was preaching about being a godly husband and a godly father. He goes, Brandon, I don't know how to do any of those things. He goes, I don't know how to pray with my wife. He goes, Brandon, I didn't grow up with a dad. I didn't grow up in the church. He goes, the only man I had in my life abused me. I don't know how to do any of those things. I'm a failure. I said, whoa, time out. And I went to each guy. I said, when you first came to the Lord, I asked him, I said, what did you struggle with? And what did you learn? And we went around the room and we shared our own successes and failures and struggles. And he sat there, and as he listened, he calmed down and his face relaxed, and he listened, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "So you guys don't have it all figured out either." I said, "No, but we're learning, and we help each other." He goes, "Oh, so I don't have to have it all figured out." I said, "No. But you just learn each day." And we had this great conversation around biblical principles of being a husband and father. Now my question to you is, what would have happened had those relationships not been there? What would have happened to Tim? Where would he be? Would he be in the church today? Tim went on and went into ministry years later. Went and helped a church plant. Imagine if those relationships had not been there. And I promise you, your churches are filled with people like Tim that just don't know how to do this. I love how we kicked it off. That was a God thing. Yeah, but how? I've taught the Life of Christ class for years. And I have people in the class, and they have questions. They don't know how to apply those things. Where are they going to learn? It's like teaching our kid to fish and handing them a book and say, "Hey, go read this book. Now go out and catch a fish." They read it, and they come back and go, "Yeah, but how do I hold the pole? And how do I do?" I have to walk alongside and teach them. That's how we would do anything in life, isn't it? Think of anything that you know how to do with your hands, or that you know how to do in life, drive a car, anything. You did it by watching and somebody walking alongside and teaching you. Isn't that true? Whether it be cook, whether it be anything. You can only learn so much from a book. And we need each other. That's where relationship comes in. That's why Jesus spent 3.5 years modeling, walking, teaching, showing, answering questions, challenging them, telling them they were wrong, telling them when they were right, letting them participate in the ministry, debriefing with them. That's what the entire Gospels are all about. But we tend to skip over all that and just go to the cross and say, "Well, they need to accept Jesus, and that's it." And yeah, that's true. But what about all the rest of the story? We have to bring relationship back into the context of disciple making. That's what we're called to do.